Positive pay accounts. These accounts have a particular purpose in combating and detecting fraud. They have been around for well over 15 years, and it's important to understand how they work and how they don't work.
What is this positive pay thing? Is it new?
Well, it's not new. If this were a person, positive pay could drive and vote in any state. What positive pay does, it provides fraud detection services as well as some control efficiencies on bank accounts. Simply put, in a traditional account, when you issue checks, the bank does not know which checks you issue. They're not aware of that until those checks are presented for payment. In a positive pay service, when you issue checks, you also send a list, a check register, to the bank. You send a file to them. They have those checks available. And then when checks are presented, they match those items against the positive pay list and file that was sent in, allowing them to identify early if those checks were issued by your organization or not.
How does this work?
Well, the fact that the file is sent to the bank and they have those sitting on their positive pay system allows them to match what clears the demand deposit account system. So as checks presented, they systematically match those up. They identify discrepancies, and some banks will identify those and provide those to you via image. They'll provide those to you via reports. And some organizations, some banks, will clean up any encoding errors. If someone keyed in the wrong amount on the check, a teller keys in the wrong amount on the check, $550 instead of $500, they will clear those up and send those back to the banking system for correction before they hit your account with some services.
What happens if you don't tell them which to pay or not to pay?
Well, if you don't tell them which to pay or not to pay, that's a lot like having an alarm system on your house, but not arming it when you go out. You need to tell them what to pay and what not to pay. But how that's determined, if there's no response, determines on how you set it up. If you had set the account up to pay if there's no response, then those checks will automatically pay. And if there's a fraudulent item, a check will be paid that you did not want to pay. If your default is not to pay, that works well if it happens to be a fraudulent item. Of course, most mismatches occur because of some error. Perhaps you didn't get a file to the bank in time, or there was an encoding error that the bank can't correct, and so that will cause those items to reject. And obviously a rejection of a valid check causes problems with either employees or vendors, as well as a payment of a fraudulent item because of inaction is also a problem. So both of those situations, paying a fraudulent item or rejecting a valid item, create problems that must be avoided by actively reviewing those mismatches on your account. That's what the system's designed for, and the system must be armed. Wake me up when he's done with this one.
Why should we pay for this service to protect the bank?
Well, oftentimes the cost is no greater than a regular account. It has become commercially reasonable for organizations to have this service, this type of protection on your account. Various court decisions have come down in recent years where the responsibility has shifted, or the responsibility is shared between the organization and the bank. It used to be that the bank bore the full brunt of that as long as you reconciled your accounts in a particular time. Now it's considered commercially reasonable for most organizations to have a service like positive pay, and most banks have set it up so that the cost is essentially the same as a regular checking account. Think about that. If you're paying the bank 15 cents a transaction, do you think they're going to want to pay $150,000 for a loss? Of course not. And so it's very important that everyone protects accounts against those who want to perpetrate fraud on organizations and on our way of life.
What are the differences between banks when it comes to perfect pay, control payments, and pay match positive pay?
Well, there are lots of different brands and labeling distinctions between banks. Some of those are actually significant differences, and others are much more in the way of marketing. But a perfect match positive pay, for example, and they come with different names. That's where the bank does a lot of the cleanup before you see the mismatches. Some mismatches occur from encoding errors, and perfect pay oftentimes is related to cleaning those items up so you have less discrepancies to look through. Now, controlled pay, that's a a service labeled by SunTrust Banks. That's where they actually do the matching up before it hits the DDA account. They take the items that are presented, match them against their controlled pay system ahead of time during the day, and provide those differences to your organization earlier. Most banks, for their positive pay system, have checks that clear, that post to their DDA system at night in the batch process, and then there's a feed from the DDA system over to the positive pay system. And so you're receiving a report of discrepancies or mismatches in the morning sometime, and you have perhaps an 8, 12, 24-hour window to resolve those items. In a controlled payment environment, you're receiving those the previous afternoon, usually sometime late in the afternoon, giving you a little more time to resolve those discrepancies.
What should I remember about positive pay accounts?
Well, first, any of your disbursement accounts, almost all of them, should have positive pay. That's a reasonable and commercially reasonable protection that you should have on those accounts. Second, this fits into your overall account protection scheme and design. Secondly, this fits into your overall account protection framework and plan. And thirdly, the default decision for positive pay is to use it, not to prove why you should. These have been around for quite some time, and they are the default standard. Check fraud is very big in our country. Many organizations are faced with great losses, either in actual dollars or certainly in terms of significant time spent in resolving those. Positive pay is a great mechanism, one of several that you will want to use to protect your disbursement accounts. Okay. And just because you reconcile an account doesn't mean the exposure has shifted entirely to the bank. That's a wrap.